So I wrote the book about my father's death in '57, and I end the book with Kennedy's death in '62, and I tell the truth about it. What happened to Jack Kennedy, why he died, and who died, and who did what, and it's a very good read. You'll like it, actually.
Can you share any Kennedy tidbits with us? And how do you know
Ask you a question.
firsthand?
I was there. I was in Dallas. I was there the night before. I was at what they called Clint Murchison Jr. had a party at his house called Egyptian. And it was called Egyptian Nights. It was a tribute to Hoover. And Meyer Lansky arranged for me to go to this party because I went there on the premise that I was going to play football for the Dallas Cowboys, and Murchison Jr. owned the Dallas Cowboys. So I was being introduced to him, and it was to go and see all the people who were there. And I saw Johnson, I saw everybody, and I listened to a lot of things that were going on. And I met a guy named McCoy who was the banker in America. And the next day, I was out running in the morning, and Johnny Roselli was running in the same park. I said, "What the hell are you doing?" He said, "Dad, you got to leave town." He said, "You shouldn't be. You need to get out of town." And I was arranging to do that anyway, but you have to ask yourself a couple questions. Who was the one person that was responsible for Jack Kennedy's death? Yeah. And if you really sat down and looked at it, it was his father. Because his father made so many enemies of people. And his father would have rather seen Jack die the way he died than him die of a disease. And Jack Kennedy was not going to live out his term. He was extremely ill. Suffered from Addison's disease very bad, which was the deterioration of the spinal cord. He had syphilis. He had 4 diseases. And they used to shoot him up every day just so he could walk around. And I liked Jack. Jack was a hell of a guy, and he was a hell of a politician. But 4 people went to see his brother, who was the top cop in the country at the time. He was the attorney general. And 4 people, including Adlai Stevenson, went to see him and tell him, "Do not let your brother go to Dallas. The animosity is horrendous." And there were so many different entities that were provoked into a situation. You had the Bay of Pigs that happened, which a lot of kids got innocently killed. That was because of Joe Kennedy. And you had the oil people of Dallas, of Texas, period. When Jack was running for nomination, H.L. Hunt went out to L.A. and gave a suitcase full of money to Joe Kennedy, for Johnson to run as vice president. And you had the Teamsters that they were harassing Hoffa, something terrible. Bobby Kennedy was. And the reason was because when Jack was running for president in the beginning, Joe Kennedy was controlled by Chicago. So you got to go all the way back to Prohibition to understand that story, why he was controlled all those years by Chicago. And he went to Giancana in Chicago and he said, "I promise you both my son's ears if you help us get elected." And Meyer Lansky and people in New York said, "What do we need Jack Kennedy for? We have Nixon. He's already in our pocket. What do we need the other guy for?" And Giancana convinced them that this was a good play, blah, blah, blah. So when he was getting nominated, Joe Kennedy told Giancana, "Got all the electoral votes are all sewed up, no problem. We got the election in the bag." Well, after the first 1.5 days that they were in LA, he called up and he said, "We got a problem. We don't have as many electoral votes as we thought." And for the very first time, Chicago went Democrat, and 2 other states around it went Democrat. And after the 3rd day, he called again and he said, well, we're still short, and there's only 1 state that can put us across the line, the state of West Virginia. Because of the mining, it was such a little state, but they had a tremendous amount of electoral votes because of the money that was down there in mining and everything, coal and all that stuff. So Giancana made a couple phone calls to the Cellini family, and who owned some casinos in West Virginia, and some debt was excused, and West Virginia raised their hand, and he got nominated. And when he was running for president, if you're a little young, I don't know if you realize how close the race was with Nixon. Well, there were dead people in Detroit, in your town, and Chicago both, that voted 20 times, and they were dead. So they got enough polls. He won by a squeaker. It was a very close race. He becomes president. And as soon as he becomes president, his father tells him, make your brother attorney general. Bobby became attorney general, and Joe said, put all my good friends in jail, meaning Giancana, the Mafia, everybody, went after everybody. And then he turned around and he said to him, those people down in Texas, those oil guys, they're making a tremendous amount of money on a subject called surplus oil. They're not paying any tax on it. And you need to float a tax on their surplus oil business. So that tax cost them $200 to $300 million a year. I think that didn't make them a little bit pissed off, you know? And the fact that Joe Kennedy was underwriting Castro and putting money into Cuba was not a happy puppy. That's why the Bay of Pigs happened, and other missile deal, the whole 9 yards. So you had a lot of people very, very angry. But nobody was angrier than the bankers of Geneva because of the crash of 29. And that made some people extremely angry, wealthy people. Because in 1926, like I said, Kennedy was under thumb to Chicago. And they sent him out to Hollywood because they controlled the film industry through the Cinematographers Union. And they had him, he put together a distribution deal for RKO because he put all the Jewish theater owners together. Excuse me 1 minute. Just 1 second. Let me just get rid of this. Hello? Hello? No, it's Jack O'Halloran. Who's this? This is not Jay's number. All right, thank you. Bye. Trying to reach my partner at my number. That's pretty good. I wonder how they did that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so in 1926, the Hamilton Club in Illinois was powerful, like the New York Athletic Club for New York, a political stronghold. And they sat Joe down and they said, we want you to do something for us. And they did a short sale against Pathé Newsreel, and they stole $5 million in broad daylight, and no one ever saw it. So they said, wow, that's pretty clever. You can do what we really want to do. And they formed a short sale that was aimed at 30 companies in Europe. The reason they did it was because after World War I, we became a war-bearing country. We started manufacturing war goods, and we were taking jobs away from Europe. That's where all the war materials and stuff were made prior to. And not only that, but Europe was a little bit disgusted that we weren't paying back as much as we should because they underwrote this country. In the very beginning, the first bank that was ever put in America, only $1 million came from America, 10 million came from Europe. And every year thereafter, Europe supplied money. And still today, 31 or 32% of the outside funding comes through London via the Geneva. So they were 30 companies that were aimed at, and Joe Kennedy, after he did his little trick with Afe, they said to him, "I want you to structure this thing." So he put this short sell aimed at these companies. One of the companies was a company owned by Blackjack Bouvier and his father and his uncle. That was Jackie Kennedy's father. Jackie Kennedy's father was Blackjack Bouvier, and they went bankrupt, and it was a Rothschild company that they ran. So a lot of people were very angry, and the short sell worked. They all made a lot of money, and they took a day off that they were going to wait and come back and finish it. And in the interim, the country panicked, and the crash happened. They didn't do it to deliberately make the crash. It just was a remnant of what they did. They overdid the short sell. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So when the crash ended in 30, Roosevelt said to Joe Kennedy, "Boy, you did a great job, kid. You know what? We're going to make you head of the SEC," because they knew Europe had to reinvest back in the country to get their money back, but they wanted to do it under different rules. And Joe Kennedy wrote the rules that they wanted to have done. Europe reinvested in the country, but they were not happy puppies at all. Not at all. And they never forgot it. And they were part of the contribution of all the people who were angry. It gave them a clear vein of how to do something. And there was young Joe Kennedy was the first person that his father wanted to be president of the United States. And he was a tremendous pilot. And he was mustering out of the service. He was like 10 days away from leaving Europe to come home. And they had devised a plane that was going to be like a kamikaze plane and fly it into the munition factories of Germany to end the war. Yeah. And they talked Joe Kennedy into test piloting this plane. And when he went up to test pilot, the plane blew up and he was dead. And a week later, they scrapped the whole thing. Joe Kennedy had already been thrown out of England because when he went to Europe, he got together with the Shah of Iran. They put a bank together. They were lending money to Hitler. Hitler came back to the same crew they had at Khashoggi. They were selling weapons. And he didn't think he was doing anything wrong because America wasn't in the war yet. But England said, "Wait a minute, you're contributing to our enemy." And they threw him out. And nobody knew why he came home because there was no television. The radio stations were owned by the Murchison family. The papers from the East Coast were owned by the Gore family in Indiana. And he was already in bed with Randolph Hearst on the West Coast. So no one ever printed any stories as to why Joe Kennedy left England. He just came home as Ambassador Joe Kennedy. And he started to parlay what he was going to do to make his son president. And then when the tragedy happened, then he said, "Well, we're going to make Jack president." And he went to Chicago, sat down to try and reassure that his second son wouldn't die. And
That's a great,
that's
wow.
his history, you know.
Thank you,
So
Jack.
because of him, you know, and then they croaked and they disgraced Teddy with the projecting thing, with the letting that girl die. And they said another Kennedy would never cross the White House doors again, and they never did. And if you ever look up history, if you go in the library, you'll find the answers to what we just talked about. They're all there. Just nobody ever receives them. They were never printed right. Kennedy Dynasty, the whole thing about the Camelot thing was horseshit. You know, Jack and Jackie was groomed to marry Jack Kennedy because her mother wanted her money back. And they both carried on in their marriage so badly that Joe Kennedy, because he knew Jack was a senator and he knew he was going to go for president, he gave Jackie $10 million to stay in the marriage. That's public knowledge. He gave her $10 million to stay in the marriage to make this Camelot appearance, that they were the happiest Catholic family and have the first Catholic president and all this other jazz. And you know, truth of the matter is the things that happened. and everything was swept under the bridge, man. You know, when the Kennedy gets killed and Jack Ruby, I mean, Oswald was a total patsy. Lee Harvey Oswald his mother was a prostitute. She was hooked up with a guy in New Orleans who worked for Carlos Marcellus, and Lee Harvey Oswald thought he was going to be a big-time spy. He worked for naval intelligence when he was a kid. It was not polite to be gay in the military. So they had clubs in Dallas and New Orleans, and all these service guys used to go there, and there were gay clubs. And Oswald was there with a microphone on his deal, and he would talk to all these captain on up, military echelon, and they were blackmailing them all. And he thought he was going to become this great spy. So this guy, George the Mournchild, and a guy named Zabruder were two white Russians that came into New York in the garment district. Meyer Lansky gave them $250,000, sent them to Dallas, Texas. They set up shop in Texas. And the Mournchild used to date Jackie Kennedy's Jackie Kennedy's aunt. She used to call him Uncle George when she was a kid. He taught Oswald Russian. He introduced Oswald to the KGB woman that he married. Oswald went to Russia, and because he couldn't keep his mouth shut, and they bugged every apartment he was in, they wound up throwing him out because he had a big mouth. So they threw him out, and he was a no-show. He came home, he was a bust out. So they groomed him for what happened at Dealey Plaza. You know, first of all, he wasn't even in the window when the shots were fired at Dealey Plaza. And the whole one bullet theory is total rubbish. If you know anything about guns at all, to take a mail-ordered rifle and you're going to shoot a shot of 1,000 feet or better, you have to take the variables in. The wind in Dealey Plaza was terrible. You had a car that was moving on a decline. You had the wind, the trees, the signs, and you have a guy supposedly, when a sharpshooter is taking a shot of that nature, he has to take in all the variables. He has to arrest his heart down below 60 because your pulse is in your finger. And to take 3 shots in 28 seconds with a mail order gun, forget about it. Ain't never happening with any accuracy. And you're shooting from that window, and the car had already been past the window. So if the one bullet theory was true, that means it would have went in the back of Kennedy's head. Not the first shot that hit Kennedy hit him in the throat, where he grabbed his throat, fell down on top of Conley. Second shot hit him in the back, lower back, that no one talked about for 10 years. And then the third shot, the driver just turned around and took it, and you see Kennedy fly backwards. The back of his head blew out. Yeah? And Greer was driving his car, and on his deathbed, he attested to that he took that shot. The Zabruder footage that you've seen had 8 frames missing that later came into vision that showed the driver taking the shot. And people say, well, how come somebody didn't see this or that? Well, it all happened in 28 seconds. You had 13 shots fired that day. And then people were scrambling all over the place. Understand?
Yeah, sorry, my silence is shock and awe. But it's fascinating.
You're talking about the first shot came from a cauldron in the side of the street, and the cauldron went from the river to the street, and it was big enough for me to walk down. And today it's all cemented in. The year after it happened, they cemented that in. It took him 6 months to reroute down Dealey Plaza. His visit, 4 people, including Adlai Stevenson, went to Bobby and said, don't let your brother go to Dallas. The animosity is terrible. And Adlai Stevenson said they were spitting at me in Houston. And here you got the president in an open car in front of a building with people with the windows open walking around. You think the Secret Service will allow anything like that? That's insanity. You understand?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're talking about all the variables that happened that day were just phenomenal, and it was all brushed under the carpet. The Warren Commission was totally bullshit. The one bullet theory was bullshit. There's no way it was a one bullet deal. And the autopsy that was done by interns. Then they flew them up to Washington where real people did an autopsy, and that wasn't divulged for 5 years till afterwards. And they proved that he had been shot in the throat, and they had patched a piece of skin up over his face in Dallas and took pictures to say that, oh no, he was shot from behind. Wasn't shot from, how does the back of your head blow out? And Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't even in the building. There was a jail right across from the building, prisoners looking straight at the window, and there were two dark-complected guys who were Cubans and one white guy in the window, and it wasn't Oswald. You know, so the whole thing was such a put-together conspiracy, and and every 10 years more of it comes out, and the truth comes out slower and slower. But, you know,
is the full truth in the book or pieces of it, or?
Yeah. I mean, if you see, I don't know if you ever watched how Ruby shot Oswald. You ever saw that footage?
No, I think I have, yeah.
Okay. Well, Ruby, first of all, they let him in that building with a gun. Come on. And the president and the killer of the president is going to be bled out by police. And when they let him out of the room, the police that was stood next to him stepped away from him, like he knew Ruby was coming to take a shot. And the other part is that here they had the guy who killed the president of the United States. There was not one set of documents on questioning of him. No, there were no tape recordings. Nothing. This guy supposedly killed the president.